You know, I was sitting in a cafe yesterday, just kind of eavesdropping as one does.
Oh, naturally.
Yeah. And I heard someone say, "Oh, I read that book, but it was the translated version, so it wasn't the real thing."
Oh, right.
And it really got me thinking, we have this default setting where we treat translation like a photocopier.
The classic photocopier fallacy.
Exactly. You put the English page in, you press a button, and the Indonesian version comes out. Maybe a little grainy, maybe the font is different, but basically it's the exact same document, just swapped.
Just a one-to-one swap.
Yeah.
And honestly, if translation were that simple, I mean, AI would have fully replaced humans 20 years ago. We wouldn't even be having this deep dive right now.
So true. And that is exactly why I'm so excited about the document we are tearing apart today. We are looking at the Rencana Pembelajaran semester.
Right, the semester learning plan.
Yeah, the syllabus for the translation course at Universitas Negeri Jakarta, specifically for their English Education Study program. And this is dated February 25, 2026.
And I know what you're thinking right now listening to this. A syllabus. Really? You want me to listen to a deep dive on a university syllabus?
I know it sounds incredibly dry, but
Yeah.
stay with us here. Because when you actually read this thing, it is not a tech list. It is a battle plan.
It really is.
It reveals that translation isn't about swapping words. It's about high-stakes negotiation between cultures. Our mission today is to completely unpack what it takes to actually learn to be a translator in 2026. We are going to uncover the black box of the translator's brain.
That is the mission.
Yeah.
We're going to look at the cognitive gymnastics, the specific training, and the ideological choices that turn a bilingual student into a professional translator.
Yeah.
By the end of this deep dive, you are going to look at your Netflix subtitles and realize there is a hidden war going on at the bottom of your screen.
So let's just start right at the foundation. Week 1. The syllabus throws out a definition of translation that honestly stopped me in my tracks.
Because it's broader than people think.
Way broader. I've always thought translation equals language A to language B. Simple. But the syllabus lists 3 distinct types: interlingual, interlingual, and intersemiotic.
This is straight from the structuralist definition, specifically Roman Jacobson.
Yeah.
And it's crucial because it blows the scope wide open right from the very first lecture.
Right.
Intralingual is what we all know. English to Indonesian, that's the standard definition. But intralingual, that is translation within the exact same language.
Which, on the surface, sounds like a contradiction. I mean, how do you translate English into English?
But think about paraphrasing. Or think about a lawyer explaining a complex contract to a client.
Okay.
The lawyer reads the legalese, which is practically a different language with its own syntax and its own vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
And they translate it into plain English so the client understands.
Oh, I see. So when my doctor explains a diagnosis to me without using all those 5-syllable Latin words, she's essentially translating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She is performing an intralingual translation. The syllabus highlights this to show students that translation is primarily about meaning, not just vocabulary. You are moving meaning from one container to another container.
And in that case, the containers just happen to be in the same language family.
Precise.
That is a great way to put it. And then there's the third one, intersemiotic, which frankly feels like it belongs in a media studies class.
It does, but it's arguably the most common form of translation we consume today in the 21st century. This is translating from a verbal sign system to a nonverbal one.
Okay, so like adapting Harry Potter the book into Harry Potter the movie?
Exactly. You are translating text descriptions into visual data, into sound design and actor performance.
Wow.
Or even simply think about a traffic sign. The word stop translates to a red octagon. The fact that UNJ starts the course here is brilliant.
Because it completely shifts the mindset.
Right. It tells the students, don't just look at your dictionary. Look at how meaning travels across any barrier.
And that perfectly sets the stage for the conflict that dominates week 2. And I really want to spend some time here because this feels like the core tension of the whole craft.
A big debate.
Yes. The syllabus introduces equivalence, or kasapadanan, and it frames it as a literal battle. Form versus meaning. Bentuk lawan maksud.
This is the eternal struggle of the translator. The giants of translation theory listed in the course references people like Eugene Nida and Mildred Larson. They essentially spent their entire careers arguing about this.
But my question is, why is it a battle? I mean, in a perfect translation, shouldn't we have both? The perfect literal words and the perfect intended meaning.
Well, in a perfect world, sure. But languages are not mathematical codes.
Right.
They're cultural artifacts. They do not map onto each other one-to-one.
Sure.
Often to save the meaning, you have to completely destroy the form.
Destroy the form. That sounds a bit dramatic.
Let's take a concrete example. Humor. Humor is the ultimate test of this tension. Suppose you have a character in an English novel who makes a pun based on the words night like a soldier in armor and night like the time of day.
Okay, classic homophone. Like, have a good night, sir knight.
Right. Now, if you translate that into Indonesian, literally keeping the form intact,
Yeah.
you have Ksatria for the soldier and Malam for the time.
Oh, right.
There is zero phonetic overlap. There is no pun. The joke totally evaporates. The form is accurate. You translated the words correctly. But the meaning, which is, hey, this is funny, is completely lost.
So to save the meaning in that scenario, you'd have to change the words entirely.
You might have to invent a totally new joke involving, I don't know, a fruit and a color in Indonesian just to make the reader laugh.
Wow.
You sacrifice the literal words to preserve the impact. You're essentially lying about the words to tell the truth about the feeling.
That feels almost dishonest, though. You're basically writing something the original author never wrote.
But if you didn't, you'd be boring the reader when the author intended to amuse them, which is the greater betrayal. To bore the reader with strict accuracy or to entertain them with a creative lie.
Man, that is a tough question. I guess that's why they call it a negotiation. And I see, looking at the syllabus, that week 3 moves from this philosophical debate to the actual mechanics of it, the process of translation.
How to.
Yeah, it lists 3 steps: analysis, transfer, and restructuring.
This is what we call the black box of the translator's mind. This 3-step model is designed to break the bad habit that literally every bilingual person starts with.
Which is translating word by word as you read. The Google Translate method.
Exactly, just trucking straight through the sentence.
Yeah.
This model forces a pause. Step 1 is analysis. You do not translate yet. You dissect.
Okay.
You look at the source text and ask, what is the tone here? Is this ironic? Is it formal? What is the grammatical structure actually doing to the reader?
You're taking the engine apart before you try to drive the car.
Perfect analogy.
Right.
Then comes a transfer. And this is really the magic part. This happens entirely inside the translator's mind. You strip the message of its English words, and you hold the pure concept, the naked idea in your head.
So it's not English anymore, but it's not Indonesian yet.
Yes. It is cognitive delinking. You're holding just the intent. And then finally, you move to restructuring. You take that naked idea and you dress it in Indonesian clothes. And you have to make sure those clothes fit perfectly.
And that fitting process brings us right to week 4, acceptability criteria.
The grading.
Yeah, because if we admit that we sometimes have to change the words to save the meaning, how on earth do you grade this? It seems wildly subjective. But the syllabus lists a specific trinity: accuracy, which is ketepatan; clarity, which is kejelasan; and naturalness, which is kewajaran.
These are the essential guardrails for a translator. Accuracy checks if you lied about the core information. If the source text says the car is red and you write the truck is blue, you failed accuracy.
Right, that's just a factual error.
That's the baseline. Then clarity is pretty simple. Can the target reader actually understand the sentence? But naturalness, that is the real beast.
Naturalness is definitely the one that caught my eye. It basically asks, does this sound like a translation?
Right. Does it sound like translationese?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sentences that are grammatically correct, but they just feel clunky, rigid.
Like saying, he is the man to whom I gave the book.
Yes. Versus just saying, I gave that guy the book. A natural translation creates the illusion that the text was originally written in Indonesian. It flows well, it has rhythm, it uses the idioms that a native speaker would actually reach for in that specific context.
It reminds me of the uncanny valley in robotics. You know when a robot looks 99% human, but the eyes are just dead and it totally creeps you out?
That is a fantastic comparison.
A translation can be completely accurate and clear, but if it lacks that naturalness, it falls right into the uncanny valley.
It absolutely does. And getting out of that valley requires a lot more than just a good dictionary. It requires a deep cultural ear. You have to be able to hear the music of the target language, not just follow its rules.
Which leads us directly into what I think is the most controversial part of this document, weeks 5 and 7, the strategy and the ideology.
Oh, absolutely.
This is where I felt the syllabus went from skill building straight into political science.
This is the point in the course where we admit that translation is never truly neutral.
The syllabus specifically contrasts source language-oriented methods with target language-oriented methods. And then in week 7, it drops these massive terms. Domestication, which is domesticasi, And foreignization, which is foreignisasi.
These are the two opposite poles of a translator's ideology. And ideology is not too strong a word here at all. It's really about how you view the relationship and the power dynamic between the two cultures.
Help us unpack these. Let's stick with food metaphors because the syllabus references cultural elements and, well, everyone eats.
Okay, let's do food. Imagine you are translating a novel from Java into English, and the characters are sitting around eating gudeg.
Jackfruit stew. Delicious,
Hmm.
but very, very specific to Yogyakarta.
Right. Now, as the translator, you have a choice to make. If you're a domesticator, your primary goal is to make the reader comfortable. You want the text to be easy to digest.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes. So maybe you translate gudeg simply as sweet stew. Or, if you're being really aggressive and culturally erasing about it, you might just call it a casserole.
Wow, so you completely erase the Javanese identity just to make it palatable for an American reader who has maybe never left Ohio.
Exactly. You bring the text to the reader, you
Yeah.
actively minimize the strangeness, you make it safe.
And the alternative, foreignization.
With foreignization, you leave it as gudeg.
Mhm.
Maybe you add a footnote explaining what it is, or maybe you don't even do that.
You just let them figure it out.
You force the English reader to stop and say, wait, what is this? I don't know this word.
Yeah.
You are forcing the reader to travel to the text.
It's totally a power dynamic.
100%. Domestication implies that the target culture, which is usually the dominant Western one, is too lazy or too superior to bother learning the foreign term. It essentially says, I shouldn't have to work to understand you.
Right.
Whereas foreignization respects the source culture's difference. It says you are a visitor here in this text. You need to learn the local terms.
That is wild. I never realized that every time I read a really smooth, easy-to-read translation, I might actually be the victim of domestication. The translator is essentially hiding the rough edges of the culture from me.
And that's exactly why the UNJ syllabus explicitly asks students to identify this. They're trained to look at a text and ask, what is this translator's ideology?
Are they trying to teach me something, or are they just trying to please me?
Exactly.
That's fascinating. It really turns the translation student into a cultural detective.
It does.
Now, knowing all this, the cognitive steps, the ideological battles, how does UNJ actually test these kids? Because I looked at the components and weight of assessment, and I was completely shocked.
Let me guess. Not enough traditional exams.
Barely any. The midterm and the final are only worth 5% each. 5%. That is negligible. I mean, in most university classes, the final exam is practically everything.
It is remarkably low for a standard university course.
Mhm.
But look at where the majority of the points actually are.
Well, the portfolio is 25%.
Mm.
And the project-based learning presentation is another 25%.
Right.
Why shift half the entire grade away from standard exams?
Because translation at its core is a craft. It is not a rigid knowledge set.
Okay.
You can memorize every single definition of equivalence by NIDA. You can memorize the exact definition of domestication. But if you panic and freeze up when you see a complex paragraph, you are a bad translator.
So the portfolio is really about showing the daily work.
It's about showing the struggle. A portfolio usually requires students to show all their drafts. Here is my first attempt at the analysis phase. Here's where I got stuck during the transfer phase. And here is exactly why I chose this specific word in the restructuring phase.
Oh, I see.
It actively rewards the process we talked about earlier. It values the journey of translating, not just the final destination.
And the project-based learning, why the presentation aspect? Why does a translator need to stand up in front of a room and talk?
That prepares them for the actual market. In the real world, professional translators have to defend their choices all the time.
That makes sense.
A client will come to you and say, why did you change my marketing slogan? It sounds completely different in Indonesian.
Right.
You need to be able to confidently stand up and say, well, I used a dynamic equivalence strategy because your literal English slogan is actually highly offensive in this specific culture.
Ah, so it's not just about being right. It's about explaining why you're right.
Exactly. It professionalizes the student. It moves them from simply being a language learner to being a language consultant. You aren't just a typist, you are an expert on cultural dredging.
I also noticed a really clear split in the later weeks of the syllabus, weeks 9 through 16, between translating academic texts versus literary texts.
Yes. This acknowledges that you actually use very different parts of your brain for different translation jobs.
How so? Can you break that down?
Academic translation, translating a medical journal, a legal brief, or a dense textbook, is all about precision. You really don't care about rhythm or the author's voice. You care entirely about accuracy and clarity.
Right, because if you try to domesticate a specific medical term, you might literally kill someone.
Exactly. In academic translation, you need to be invisible. But literary translation,
That's the art.
that's pure art. That's where you actively deal with the domestication versus foreignization debate we just had. That's where you constantly worry about falling into the uncanny valley.
So a student might be brilliant at translating technical manuals, but absolutely terrible at translating poetry.
And vice versa. This course forces them to try their hand at both. They might find they hate the ambiguity of literary translation, but absolutely love the strict precision of academic texts.
It really seems like the syllabus is trying to build a very well-rounded, almost philosophical practitioner. It's definitely not just, here's an English to Indonesian dictionary, good luck.
Not at all. And looking at their reference list, they intentionally balance the Western canons people like Nida Kat for Newmark with Indonesian translation scholars like Macaulay and Permana.
And why is that important?
Because English to Indonesian translation has very specific systemic challenges that a generic Western theory book just won't cover.
Like what makes translating into Indonesian uniquely challenging?
Well, plurality, for one thing, is handled very differently. Or pronouns. Indonesian doesn't strictly distinguish he and she with the word daya. Context is absolutely everything.
Wow.
Or the strict hierarchy in the language. How you address an older person versus a younger person changes the vocabulary. The local scholars help ground all that high-level theory in the actual reality of the Indonesian language structure.
That makes perfect sense. Now, before we wrap up, I have to mention one highly specific rule in the Tata Tertib, the code of conduct at the end of the syllabus.
Let me guess the plagiarism rule.
Yes. It says plagiarism equals automatic grade E, the literal death penalty for a student's GPA.
It is strict.
But my question is, in 2026, with AI absolutely everywhere, what does plagiarism even mean in the context of a translation course?
That is the big ongoing question in the field right now. In this specific educational context, plagiarism often means the uncritical use of machine translation.
Okay.
If you just paste the English text into Google Translate or ChatGPT and hand it in as your assignment, you haven't actually done the work.
You completely skipped the transfer phase.
To skip the entire cognitive workout, you didn't learn to lift the weight yourself. You just let the robot lift it for you.
Right.
And if the robot makes a subtle mistake, which it very often does with cultural nuance, you won't even spot it because you didn't do the initial analysis.
So the strict grading policy is really about protecting the integrity of this skill itself.
Ideally, yes. It forces the student to use AI as an assistant, perhaps for checking vocabulary or brainstorming synonyms, but not as a total replacement for the human restructuring process.
So pulling this all together, we started this deep dive thinking translation was a super simple equation. Word A equals word B.
And we found out it's actually this incredibly complex mix of cognitive science, creative writing, cultural diplomacy, and honestly, even a little bit of acting.
It really completely changes how I view the media I consume on a daily basis. Every translated book sitting on my shelf is actually a restructured reality.
It absolutely is.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought, something to really chew on after this. We talked earlier about how equivalence often requires actively changing the form to save the meaning.
The org example.
Right. And we talked about how a natural translation hides the fact that it is a translation at all.
It creates the illusion of the original text.
So if the very best translations are the ones that successfully hide their tracks, and if they frequently change the literal words to save the overall vibe, are we ever truly reading the original author?
Oh, that is the ultimate question.
Or are we actually just reading a highly sophisticated remix created by the translator?
I would strongly argue that every translated work is a co-authored book where one of the authors, the translator, is forced to be immeasurable.
A silent partner in the creation of meaning. That is definitely something to think about the next time you turn on those subtitles or pick up a translated manga. Huge thanks to the English Education Study Program at UNJ for providing this fascinating roadmap of their curriculum.
It was an absolute pleasure to decode it.
And thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We will
This-
see you on the next one.